It was a dull, cloudy Tuesday when the strange events began. The air outside held that heavy stillness that sometimes comes before a storm, and the sky was a pale gray with no sign of the sun. Inside the school, everything seemed normal on the surface. Students chatting in the hallways, lockers slamming, footsteps echoing on the tile floors. But beneath it all, something didn't feel right. The building itself seemed different. There was a strange smell in the air, like metal and damp earth, and the lights above flickered with a soft buzz more often than usual. It was just barely noticeable, the kind of thing most people would ignore. But it planted a seed of unease in the back of the mind. The morning had started like any other. First period classes passed slowly, filled with sleepy students and tired teachers. The hum of routine carried on, but the feeling of unease only grew stronger. By the time the second period rolled around, a subtle tension seemed to have settled over the school. Teachers were unusually quiet, glancing toward the windows more than they usually did. One of the janitors, a quiet older man named Mr. Darrell, could be seen near the old wing of the school, putting up yellow tape and muttering something under his breath. The old wing had been closed off for years due to water damage and broken electrical systems, but no one ever really paid it any attention. That day, however, Mr. Darrell looked genuinely nervous, as if he knew something he wasn't telling anyone. A few students noticed him as they passed by, watching him nail a handwritten sign to the door of the old wing. "Do not enter. Dangerous." His hands were shaking slightly. One girl, curious and a little bold, asked him what was going on. He looked at her, eyes tired and voice low, and simply said, "Something's not right back there." Then he walked away without another word. His reaction lingered in the minds of the few who witnessed it. By the third period, the strange feeling had spread like an invisible mist. The classroom felt colder than it should have been. The windows, though closed, rattled softly, and a low hum vibrated through the walls. Most students were too focused on their phones or half listening to the teacher's lecture to notice, but a few of them looked up now and then, their eyes darting around the room as if waiting for something. That was when it happened. Without warning, a sharp crackle came through the intercom. It buzzed loudly, then fell into static. Everyone paused. The teacher walked toward the wall unit and pressed the call button, assuming it was just a technical glitch. But before she could speak, a voice came through, clear and urgent. "Lockdown. This is not a drill. Lock all doors. Stay silent." The classroom went dead silent. The teacher's expression changed instantly. Her face turned pale, and she dropped everything she was holding. Without a word, she rushed to the door, turned the lock, shut the blinds, and signaled for everyone to get down and away from the windows. Some students laughed nervously, thinking it was just another practice drill. But the look in the teacher's eyes said otherwise. This wasn't a joke. Something real was happening. Everyone crouched down in the corners, behind desks, under tables, trying not to breathe too loudly. The lights were turned off, and the room was swallowed in shadows. Only the faint glow of a few phones lit up faces, but even those were quickly dimmed. There was something about the silence that followed. It wasn't peaceful. It was tight, heavy, almost pressing down on the skin, the kind of silence that screams. Then the sound started. From somewhere out in the hallway, faint at first, came a dragging noise, slow, steady, and rhythmic. It echoed down the corridor, soft and wet. The kind of sound that makes the hairs on the back of the neck rise without understanding why. At first, it could have been mistaken for a janitor's mop being pulled along the floor, but it wasn't. It was too slow, too uneven. The teacher held a finger to her lips, her other hand trembling against the desk. No one dared to move. The sound grew closer, inch by inch. Then came the footsteps. Light, almost playful. One step. Pause. Another step. Another pause. It didn't sound like someone walking normally. It sounded like someone, or something, pretending to walk like a person. Then came the knocking. Not on the classroom door, but the one across the hallway. 3 gentle taps. Then silence. Another set of knocks. Farther down. And then closer. Closer. The dragging sound came back. Something was moving up and down the hall, knocking on every classroom door, pausing, listening. The teacher slowly moved toward the door and pressed her ear against it. Her eyes widened and she backed away quickly. She mouthed something that couldn't be heard in the dark, but her face said it all. Suddenly, from just outside the classroom, there was a loud scratch. It ran along the bottom of the door like claws on metal. Long, slow, and deep. The students froze in place. A few covered their mouths to stop from screaming. A faint, raspy breath could be heard just beyond the thin wood separating them from whatever was out there. Then, a voice. It didn't sound human, not entirely. It was broken, cracked, like someone trying to imitate a child's voice with an old, worn-out tape recorder. And it whispered, almost playfully, "I see you." The room stayed still. No one blinked. No one dared to move. One student at the back of the class, a quiet boy who barely ever spoke, began to cry silently, his hands shaking uncontrollably. The only sound in the room was the soft breathing of terrified teenagers and the slow, rhythmic thump of something, tapping gently on the classroom door. Then the lights went out completely. The hallway, the classroom, everything plunged into pure blackness. The silence returned, but it wasn't the same silence from before. This one was deeper, heavier. It felt like the entire school was holding its breath, and then the doorknob started to turn. Darkness blanketed the classroom like a thick, choking fog, pressing down on every corner, swallowing every shape, and silencing even the bravest thoughts. The moment the lights cut out, a new kind of fear settled in, one that lived not just in the body, but in the bones. The doorknob, which had been still moments before, began to turn ever so slowly, each click echoing like thunder in the tense, breathless silence. It didn't rattle or shake violently. It turned with careful precision, like someone or something on the other side knew exactly how to open it. But the lock held strong. The old, stubborn lock that had barely been replaced in years suddenly felt like the only barrier between safety and something far more sinister. A faint scratching sound followed the motion, slow and deliberate, as if long nails or claws were being gently dragged across the metal handle. Within the darkness of the classroom, everyone remained perfectly still. Even the softest breaths were held in lungs that had forgotten how to exhale. A strange coldness crept into the room. Not the kind caused by broken heaters or open windows, but something deeper, unnatural, a chill that carried the weight of old buried things. From beyond the door, footsteps shifted again, soft, almost playful. They moved away, slowly, with the dragging sound returning behind them. The sound of something being pulled, flesh, cloth, or bone, no one could tell, scraped across the tiles as it retreated down the hallway. The teacher, still crouched low near the windows, motioned with shaking hands for everyone to remain silent. The door had not opened, but whatever had been outside was still close. Time passed slowly, and the room remained sealed in shadow. At some point, a faint red emergency light flickered on above the whiteboard, casting a weak and eerie glow. It offered just enough illumination to see the outlines of desks, the slouched shapes of students huddled together, and the strained face of the teacher, who had not spoken a word since the lockdown began. No one dared to whisper. In that uneasy silence, the school began to speak in strange ways. Pipes in the walls groaned like someone crying behind concrete. The building moaned with a low, humming vibration that seemed to crawl under the skin. Somewhere far off, a door slammed, followed by what sounded like a scream muffled through thick walls. It didn't sound like a student or even an adult. It was too shrill, too warped, like something trying to copy the sound of a scream, but not quite getting it right. From the back corner of the classroom, a boy named Liam slowly turned his head, his eyes wide, not with fear, but with recognition. His lips barely moved, but the look in his eyes said more than words could. He had heard that sound before. Liam had always been the quiet one, the kid who kept to himself, who sketched strange things in the corners of his notebooks, eyes, symbols, doors without frames. Most classmates paid him no mind. But in that moment, when the darkness seemed to press tighter around the class and the scratching started again, this time under the floor, Liam whispered one sentence that made blood run cold. "That's not a person." The girl next to him glanced his way, her lips parting slightly, but she didn't ask what he meant. She didn't have to. The dragging sound returned again, but now it came from above. The ceiling creaked. Dust rained down from the tiles. Something was crawling through the air vents, slowly and with heavy limbs. The metal of the ducts groaned with each movement, and occasionally, a sharp sound like claws scraped the inside of the vents. The teacher's eyes darted upward, her hands gripping the edge of the desk as if to hold herself to reality. Then, it happened again. 3 slow knocks. Not on the door this time, not on the wall, but from inside the vent above their heads. Every student in the room froze completely. Even those who had tried to stay calm up to that point now had tears silently slipping down their cheeks. The knocking echoed through the metal with a dull, hollow rhythm, followed by another sound, breathing, deep and raspy, wet and broken. It was breathing into the vent like it knew they were all there. Then, as quickly as it started, it stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse than the sound itself. The classroom stayed frozen for long minutes. And then, something unexpected happened. The intercom clicked again. The static returned, louder and sharper than before. And then, the principal's voice came through, but it didn't sound right. The tone was flat, mechanical, almost like a recording, and the words were just slightly off. Lockdown. Over. Students may resume their class. S. There was a slight delay between each word, as if they were being said by someone who didn't fully understand the language. The message repeated twice, exactly the same each time. By the third repetition, the teacher stood up slowly, her face filled with doubt and confusion. The students remained, huddled in place, unsure whether to trust the announcement. It didn't feel like it was truly over. Still, after a long silence with no further noise from the hallway or the vents, the teacher cautiously unlocked the door. The hallway beyond was dimly lit by flickering emergency lights, and it was completely empty. No teachers, no students, just silence. One by one, the students were guided out of the classroom, each of them stepping carefully, hearts still pounding. Down the hall, a few classroom doors stood wide open, but those rooms were empty. No sign of students or staff. In the middle of the floor, where dust had settled from years of disuse, strange drag marks led from the old wing and stopped directly outside the classroom they had been hiding in. The teacher didn't speak. She simply guided them away, hands trembling, eyes darting toward the ceiling. Later that day, an announcement came over the official school system. The principal, now speaking in her normal voice, explained that the lockdown had been the result of a false alarm triggered by a sensor malfunction. No threats had been found. No one had been harmed. That was the story told to the parents, the staff, and even the local police who came to check. But something didn't add up. The security footage from every hallway camera had mysteriously vanished. The hard drives storing the files were wiped completely. The janitor, Mr. Darrell, the last person seen near the old wing, never returned. His car was still in the parking lot, his phone still in the break room, but he was gone, and no one ever saw him again. That night, Liam stayed behind after school. He had been quiet during the chaos, but now he seemed different, disturbed, as if something in his mind had been unlocked. When a classmate asked him what he thought had happened, he didn't speak for a long time. Then, with a shaky breath, he said something strange. "It comes from the old wing. It waits in the cracks. When people go missing, they say it's just accidents. But the school is lying." Before anyone could question him, he turned and walked away. The next morning, Liam was absent. The sun rose the next day, casting a pale light across the school grounds. But there was something different about the way the shadows clung to the building, as if the darkness had been somehow stretched and left behind. The halls felt colder, too, and the air was thick with an oppressive stillness that made every footstep sound too loud, every whisper feel like a breach of a long-held silence. Students, still shaken by the previous day's events, moved through the hallways in silence, their eyes glancing nervously at the doors and windows, half expecting something, or someone, to appear out of nowhere. The principal's calm reassurance from the day before had done little to settle the unease that had taken root in the hearts of those who had witnessed the strange happenings. No one seemed willing to speak of it aloud, but the truth was clear in their eyes. Something wasn't right with the school. Something was hiding just beneath the surface, and everyone who had been in that classroom knew it. The school, once a place of routine and noise, now felt like an empty shell, a building just barely holding on to its purpose. Classes proceeded, as usual, but the students were no longer themselves. They whispered in corners, eyes darting nervously as if expecting the hallways to collapse in on them at any moment. The teachers, too, were different, walking around with haunted looks, faces drawn and tired as if something had been taken from them, something they hadn't even realized was gone until it was too late. It didn't help that Liam was still absent. No one could find him, not even his family. His phone was off and he hadn't logged into social media. The only trace left of him was a single note on his desk that simply read, "It knows when you're alone." Then, that afternoon, another strange thing happened. The school's janitor, Mr. Darrell, returned. No one had seen him for over a day, and when he walked through the door, his face was pale, his eyes wide and unblinking, as if he had seen something no one was ever meant to see. He didn't acknowledge anyone. He didn't stop to speak to anyone. He simply walked through the halls like a ghost, his feet making no sound on the floor, and his eyes never straying from the floor in front of him. It was as if he was looking for something, searching for something that wasn't there. The other staff members watched him from a distance, confused by his strange behavior. The moment he disappeared into the old wing of the school, a sense of dread swept through the building, like the air had shifted in a way that no one could explain. It wasn't long before the whispers began again. Rumors spread quickly among the students. The old wing of the school, long abandoned and never used, was where Mr. Darrell had been seen. It was where Liam had vanished the night before. It was also where the drag marks had started, where the scratching sounds had come from. It didn't take long for the brave few to decide that they needed answers. There was something hidden in that part of the building. Something dark, something old, and something waiting. By the time school had let out that day, a group of students, those who had witnessed the events in the classroom, had gathered at the entrance to the old wing. The door, which had always been locked, stood slightly ajar. No one was certain how it had been opened, but the sense of foreboding was enough to freeze anyone in their tracks. But these students were different. They had already felt the darkness of the school in their bones, and they knew they couldn't go on living in fear. They had to understand what was happening, what had happened in that room. As they cautiously entered the hall, the familiar silence weighed heavily on them. Their footsteps echoed loudly against the cold, cracked walls, and the smell of dust and decay hung thick in the air. The fluorescent lights above flickered erratically, casting strange, erratic shadows along the walls, and the temperature seemed to drop several degrees with each step they took deeper into the old wing. The hallway stretched endlessly in front of them, its worn linoleum floor creaking beneath their weight. The air was stagnant, as though it hadn't been disturbed in years. But then, just as they were about to turn back, the unmistakable sound of something scraping against metal, slow and methodical, reached their ears. It was coming from behind one of the doors along the hall. Without thinking, they pushed open. The door and what they found inside chilled them to the bone. The room was empty, save for a few old desks, piles of forgotten papers, and strange symbols scratched into the walls. Symbols that looked far too deliberate to be the work of any ordinary student. The walls, once covered in peeling paint, were now marred with dark stains, streaks of red that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. But it wasn't the bloodstains that caught their attention. It was the center of the room, the strange hole in the floor. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a discolored patch of linoleum. But as they drew closer, they realized it was far more than that. A hole, circular and unnaturally deep, had been carved into the floor. The edges were jagged and uneven, as if something had been forced through it. From within the hole, a soft, wet sound echoed up toward them, like something dripping into water. One of the students, a girl named Sarah, reached out and hesitated for a moment before placing her hand on the rim of the hole. The moment she did, the temperature in the room plummeted and an icy breeze swept across her skin. She recoiled in shock, but it was too late. Something alive, reached up from the darkness below. It was an instant, a flash, but in that fleeting moment, they saw it. Pale, twisted hands with long, bony fingers emerged from the hole, grabbing onto the edge as though trying to pull itself out. The students backed away, gasping for breath, but no matter how far they moved, the hands followed. They watched in horror as the rest of the creature began to emerge. It wasn't fully human, nor fully animal. It was a grotesque thing, a monstrosity of skin and bone, with hollow black eyes that seemed to drink in the light. Its limbs were twisted, its body contorted in unnatural ways, as if it had been buried beneath the school for centuries. It let out a low, guttural growl, a noise that was neither animal nor human, and with terrifying speed, it lunged at them. In the chaos that followed, the students scrambled to escape, running back through the halls with the creature hot on their heels. But as they neared the exit, they were met with an unthinkable sight. The door to the old wing slammed shut, locking them inside. The room seemed to pulse with a dark energy, as if the school itself was alive, breathing, and waiting. Their panicked screams echoed in the darkness, but no one could hear them. The school had been waiting for this moment, for the students who dared to seek the truth. The creature pursued them, dragging itself across the floor with unnatural speed, its eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. As the students raced through the hallways trying to escape, the lights flickered, and the temperature dropped even further. The air was thick with fear, and the walls seemed to close in on them, each hallway narrowing as they ran. The school had become a labyrinth, a prison that refused to let them go. But there was no escape. Not for those who dared to look into the dark heart of the school. Finally, the doors to the outside world came into view, and they burst through them, desperate to escape the nightmare that had become their reality. But when they looked back, they saw something that made their blood run cold. The school stood silent and still in the fading light of the day. The doors were locked, the windows were sealed shut, and in the distance, they could still hear the faintest scratching sound coming from deep within. No one would ever speak of that day again, but the truth was clear. The school had been hiding something for far too long, and the thing that had been buried beneath the floors was not finished yet.